Welcome to the story. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and support me. The moon hung low in the sky, its silvery light shimmering against the darkened hill. Somewhere, far in the distance, wolves howled, but here in the village of Caldon, all was quiet, at least for now. Alan sat by the dying fire, staring into the embers. His fingers traced the familiar pattern of his father's sword, an heirloom he had carried for as long as he could remember. It had seen its share of battles, but none could compare to the war that was coming. None of those fights could prepare him for what awaited. He sighed and set the sword down on the grass beside him, closing his eyes to rest. The villagers had been on edge for weeks, hearing rumors of the Dark Lord's forces moving closer. His father had always spoken of dark times, but Alan had never believed they would arrive so soon. As sleep began to pull him under, a voice called to him, soft yet commanding. Cherish Alan. His eyes snapped open, and he looked around the campfire. He was alone, or at least he thought he was. The voice came again, stronger this time. "Dear Alan, you have been chosen." Startled, Alan stood, his hand instinctively reaching for his sword. But the blade felt cold, lifeless in his grip. The voice was inside his head, now clear as a bell. "Ara, come to me, Alan." The world around him began to shift, the campfire's light dimming as shadows grew. Alan found himself standing in a vast moonlit field. At the center of it stood a tall, slender figure cloaked in silver light. Her face was obscured, but her presence radiated power and authority. "You are the one," she said, her voice ethereal, the chosen bearer of the blade of silver moon. Alan swallowed hard, his heart thudding in his chest. "Don't she understand? I am just a villager. I am no hero." The figure stepped closer, her hand reaching out. "Har, the blade chooses not based on what you are, but what you will become. Darkness is spreading, and only you can stop it." He shook his head, stepping back. "You have no choice," the figure said, her voice echoing through the night. "You must embrace your destiny or all will be lost." Before Alan could respond, the figure vanished, and he was left alone in the moonlit field. A cold wind swept through the air, and when he looked down, he saw it. A sword, sleek, silver, glowing with an otherworldly light, resting at his feet. The blade of silver moon. Alan awoke with a start, his heart racing. He blinked, looking around. The campfire had long since burned out, but something caught his eye. Lying beside his own sword, exactly where the figure had stood in his dream, was the silver blade. His breath caught in his throat. It was real. The blade of silver moon was real. 2 days later, Alan stood on the edge of Caldon, the sword strapped across his back, unsure of where his journey would take him. He had told no one about the sword, about the voice. He wasn't sure if anyone would believe him. But he knew he had to leave. If the rumors were true, the Dark Lord's sources were closed. And if the prophecy was to be believed, the blade in his hand was the only thing that could stop them. As he made his way through the dense forest, Alan couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching him. The shadows between the trees seemed to move, and every sound set him on edge. His hand tightened around the hilt of the sword as he pressed forward. After several hours of walking, the trees began to thin, and Alan found himself standing on the edge of a vast open plain. In the distance, he could see the towering peaks of the northern mountains, home to the dwarves. According to legend, they were the keepers of the oldest magic, and if anyone could help him understand the blade, it would be them. But he wasn't alone. From the corner of his eye, he caught a glimpse of movement. He spun, drawing the blade from its sheath, its silver light cutting through the gloom. A figure emerged from the shadows, a young woman, her long silver hair catching the moonlight. "I mean you no harm," she said, raising her hands in a gesture of peace. Alan narrowed his eyes, keeping his sword raised. "Who are you?" "My name is Lyra," she said, stepping forward cautiously. "I am a sorceress, and I've been looking for you." "Looking for me? Why?" She smiled softly. "Because you are the chosen one, the bearer of the blade of silver moon, and we have a long journey ahead of us." Alan hesitated, his grip on the sword tightening. "How do you know about the blade?" "I felt it," Lyra said simply. "Every sorcerer in the land felt it the moment you touched it. The prophecy speaks of a great war, and you are the key to stopping it." Alan lowered the sword, though his mind was still racing. "I can understand why me and I'm no one." "Because the blade chose you," Lyra said, her voice gentle but firm. "And now you must choose to embrace that destiny. The Dark Lord's forces are gathering. If we don't act soon, it will be too late." Alan looked down at the blade, its silver light shimmering in the moonlight. Could he really be the one to stop the Dark Lord? Was he ready for that kind of responsibility? I don't know if I can do this. You can, Lypra said, stepping closer. I bet you won't. I'll be with you, and together we will find the strength to defeat the darkness. Over the next few days, Alan and Lyra traveled across the plains, heading toward the Dwarven Mountain. Along the way, they encountered small bands of the Dark Lord, some minions, twisted creatures born from shadow and flame. Each time Alan drew the blade, its silver light cutting through the darkness. But with every battle, doubt gnawed at him. He wasn't sure it's strong enough, wasn't too skilled enough. The blade felt heavy in his hands as if it knew he wasn't worthy of it yet. As they neared the base of the mountains, Lyra stopped, her eyes scanning the horizon. Time we were close. Anyway, she said, her voice barely a whisper. To what asked, following her gaze. To Thorin's camp, she replied. He'll send Dwarf Warrior, and we will need his help if we were going to unite the races against the Dark Lord. Alan frowned. Why would he help us? Lyra smiled faintly. He want to. At first, dwarves don't trust outsiders easily. But he sends a good man, and when he sees the blade, he will know we're retelling the truth. Alan nodded, though he still wasn't sure how they were going to convince anyone to follow them. He barely believed in himself, but Lyra seemed confident, and that was enough for now. As they continued up the mountain, the air grew colder, the wind biting at their skin. Finally, they reached a large encampment nestled between two towering peaks. Dwarves moved about, their armor glinting in the dim light, their axes slung across their back. At the center of the camp stood a dwarf with a thick beard and broad shoulders, his eyes scanning the horizon as if expecting trouble. That's a stern, Lyra whispered. Let me do the talking. Alan followed her lead, keeping the blade strapped to his back as they approached the dwarf. What business do you have here, outsiders? Thorin demanded, his voice like gravel. Lyra bowed slightly. We seek your help, Thorin. The Dark Lord's forces are growing stronger by the day, and we need ally. Thorin scoffed, crossing his arms over his chest. And why would I risk my men to help strangers? Alan hesitated, but Lyra's eyes urged him forward. He slowly unsheathed the blade of silver moon, its silver light glowing in the gathering darkness. Thorin's eyes widened, and for a moment the camp fell silent. Harry, is that the blade of silver moon? Lyra said, her voice steady. Yes, Alan is its chosen wielder. Thorin stared at the blade, his expression unreadable. Finally, he nodded. Very well. We will listen to what you have to say. Thorin's camp bustled with the energy of preparation as Alan stood at its heart, the blade of silver moon resting uneasily at his side. The dwarves' hardened faces reflected a mix of curiosity and skepticism as they eyed him, and he could feel their judgment weighing heavily on his shoulders. Even with the blade's glow, Alan doubted they saw him as anything more than untested youth. He wasn't sure if he saw himself as anything more, either. Lyra stood close by, her presence steady, offering unspoken support. Thorin, after their brief introduction, had remained largely silent, watching Alan with piercing eyes. Finally, the dwarf warrior spoke, his voice cutting through the hum of the camp. The blade's strength power is no secret to us, Thorin rumbled, but the wielder is another matter. He stepped closer, his eyes narrowing as he assessed Alan. The prophecy may speak of the sword, but it doesn't truly guarantee the strength of the one who carries it. Alan swallowed, resisting the urge to look away. I am not asking you to follow me blindly, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. I am asking you to help us stand against the Dark Lord. The blade, its symbol, not a guarantee. I know that, but I believe we can unite the races, and together we can stop him. Thorin's expression remained hard, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of recognition. He turned to Lyra. The sorceress speaks for him. Lyra nodded. He is the one, Thorin. The blade chose him, and we've seen its power already. But we can't do this alone. We need the dwarves, the elves, and every free being who stands against the darkness. The dwarf warrior grunted, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he nodded. Very well. I will march with you, Alan of Kaldan. But know this, if you falter, if you fall to fear or doubt, it will be the end of us all. The blade is no mere tool. Segment responsibility. Alan felt the weight of Thorin's words settle over him like a heavy cloak. He could feel the eyes of the camp on him, waiting, watching. He gave a firm nod. though his stomach churned with uncertainty. I understand. The following days were a blur of preparation. The Kron and his warriors made their plans, coordinating with Lycra to gather intelligence on the movements of the Dark Lord's forces. Scouts reported sightings of dark armies amassing near the Black Ridge Pass, a key choke point leading into the heart of the free land. If the Dark Lord's armies breached it, there would be nothing standing between them and the kingdoms beyond. It wasn't too long before they were on the march, Alan at the front of the column, the blade of silver moon gleaming at his side. Lyra and Thorin flanked him, their expressions focused and determined. The landscape around them grew colder as they neared the pass, the air thick with the tension of impending battle. As they approached Black Ridge, the terrain grew rugged with jagged rocks jutting up from the earth like broken teeth. The pass itself was narrow, a natural fortress that could be defended with the right strategy. Thorin's warriors began setting up their defenses, fortifying the narrowest points and positioning archers on the high ridges above. Alan stood at the edge of the pass, gazing down into the darkness beyond. He could feel it, a palpable, oppressive force, lurking just out of sight. The Dark Lord, Sami, was near. They'll come at night, Thorin muttered, standing beside him. The Dark Ones always do. We will have the advantage with the high ground, but it won't last long. Their numbers are overwhelming. Alan nodded, his hand resting on the hilt of the blade. He had been through skirmishes before, but this would be different. This would be a true test, not just of his skill, but of his resolve. Could he face the darkness head-on and not falter? As night fell, a heavy silence settled over the pass. The wind howled through the narrow canyon, carrying with it the scent of smoke and decay. Alan's waist grip tightened on the blade, the cold metal reassuring in his hand. He could feel the pulse of its power, faint but growing stronger as the darkness closed in. Lyra appeared at his side, her eyes scanning the horizon. They were coming. She said softly, "Can you feel it?" Alan nodded. "I can." A horn sounded in the distance, low and mournful, echoing through the path. From the shadows, they emerged dark figures, twisted and malformed, their eyes glowing with malevolent light. The Dark Lord's minions, soldiers of shadow and flame, began to pour into the pass, their numbers vast. Alan sartorized, but he forced himself to breathe, to focus. The blade seemed to hum in his hand, its silver light cutting through the gloom. He could feel the eyes of the dwarves on him, waiting for him to leap. Archers, Thorin bellowed, and a volley of arrows rained down from the ridges above, striking the advancing horde. But it was only a momentary reprieve. The dark creatures surged forward, their numbers seemingly endless. Alan raised the blade high, its light flaring brighter than ever before. "Hold the line," he shouted, his voice stronger than he felt. "We can stop them here." The dwarves roared in response, their axes and hammers at the ready as the first wave of enemies crashed against their defenses. Alan plunged into the fray, the blade cutting through the darkness like a beacon. Each strike seemed to weaken the dark creatures, their forms dissolving into shadows as the sword passed through them. But for every enemy that fell, two more seemed to take its place. The battle raged on, the clang of steel and the screams of the dying filling the air. Alan fought with everything he had, but doubt gnawed at him with every passing moment. Could they really hold out against such overwhelming numbers? As the night wore on, exhaustion began to take its toll. Alan's arms ached, his movements growing slower. The blade felt heavier in his hands, its light dimming. He stumbled, nearly losing his footing as a dark creature lunged at him, its claws raking his side. Pain seared through him, and for a moment, fear gripped his heart. He could feel the darkness pressing in, suffocating, overwhelming. The blade flickered, its power waning. "No," Alan gasped, struggling to stand. I can't do this." Alan Lyra's voice cut through the chaos, sharp and commanding. She appeared at his side, her hands glowing with magic as she cast a protective barrier around them. "You can do this. The blade chose you for a reason." "I am not strong enough," Alan whispered, his breath coming in ragged gasps. "I am not worthy." Lyra grabbed his arm, forcing him to meet her gaze. "It's not about strength, Alan. It's not about courage. The blade's power comes from within you. You have to believe in yourself." Alan stared at her, his mind racing. Courage. The word echoed in his thoughts, a distant memory of the figure in his dream. The spirit of the silver moon. She had spoken of courage, too, of overcoming fear. He looked down at the blade, its silver light barely flickering now. The darkness was closing in, the sounds of the battle fading into the background as his vision tunneled. But in that moment, something shifted inside him. The fear that had been gnawing at him, the doubt, the uncertainty, it was still there, but it no longer controlled him. He took a deep breath, gripping the blade with renewed determination. I want, let them win. The blade flared to life once more, its silver light blazing brighter than ever before. Alan surged to his feet, the pain in his side forgotten as he charged forward, the blade cutting through the dark creatures with ease. Each strike sent waves of light through the battlefield, pushing back the darkness. The tide of the battle began to turn. The dwarves rallied behind him, their war cries echoing through the pass as they pressed the advantage. The dark creatures, once overwhelming, began to falter under the onslaught of light and steel. And then, as suddenly as it had begun, the battle was over. The last of the dark creatures dissolved into shadows, their forms vanishing into the night. The pass was littered with the fallen, but the dwarfs had held the line. Alan stood at the center of the battlefield, the blade of silver moon still glowing softly in his hand. His body ached, but his heart felt lighter than it had in days. He had done it. They had done it. Theron approached, his face grim but respectful. You fought well, lad, he said, gruffly. Perhaps you are worthy of that blade, after all. Alan managed a tired smile, perhaps. Lyra joined them, her expression one of quiet pride. This is only the beginning, she said softly. The Dark Lord will send more. We need to gather the elves, the humans, and everyone willing to stand against him. Alan nodded, his resolve stronger than ever. The battle may have been won, but the war was far from over. And with the blade of silver moon at his side, he would be ready for whatever came next.